Let's talk about calling raises rather than re-raising. Too often I hear television commentators say things like, this is a raise or fold situation, when in fact this is the exact type of situation where a player should call. If you're one of the better players at the table, you want to make most of your decisions after the flop and not before it. It's a safer way to protect your stack, and you'll likely make better decisions after the flop than your opponent would. In fact, I seldom re-raise before the flop, despite my hand. By doing that, I'm able to disguise the strength of my hand pre-flop, and I'm also able to trap unsuspecting opponents who deem my smooth call as a sign of weakness. I've busted lots of players by not re-raising before the flop with pocket aces. Of course, you run the risk of being outdrawn on the flop, but the rewards far outweigh the risk. For example, a player from early position raises and you think he may have ace-king, ace-queen, or a big pair like jacks, queens, kings, or even aces. You look down at a pair of pocket sevens. As I said earlier, I've heard many commentators say this is a raise or fold situation. And while folding is sometimes correct, it's rarely ever correct to re-raise in the situation. For one, your opponent will only call you with a bigger pair or when he is in a coin flip situation with a hand like ace-king. As long as the stacks are deep enough, the best play here would be to call. That way, you could play the hand in position after the flop, and if you are lucky enough to flop a set, you just might be able to get all of your opponent's chips. If the flop comes ragged, 9-4 deuce or 8-4-3, your pair just might be the best hand also. You should be able to figure out when to continue after the flop based on your opponent's betting, but we'll get to that a little later. Now, if you re-raise with the sevens, you give your opponent a chance to shut you out of the pot. With a good bust-em hand like pocket sevens, your goal is to get to the flop as cheaply as possible. If you re-raise before the flop, your opponent may come back over the top of you, forcing you to lay down the hand. That's an extremely bad result, since you may have either A, missed your chance to bust your opponent if he had aces, or B, you might allow the player to semi-bluff you off the hand if in fact he had ace-king. I can remember in my own journey through learning how to play this game how much it would annoy me when the guy on my left would smooth call all my raises. If he re-raised me, that would make for an easy decision. However, if you had to describe the one type of player that you'd least like to face at a no-limit hold'em table, it's the player that just keeps calling your pre-flop raises in position. So I decided, why don't I become that guy? That's where this pesky little strategy was born. Most players show their biggest weaknesses with their post-flop play. Lots of people have read books and have studied how to play the various pre-flop scenarios, but there are so many variables to playing after the flop that it's a much more difficult task to master. So, if you are playing against players whose strengths are pre-flop rather than post-flop, it would only make sense to see more flops with them by simply smooth calling rather than re-raising. This is especially important against players who overplay their hands pre-flop. For example, if you're up against a player who likes to re-raise with hands like pocket nines, ace-king, ace-queen, you should avoid re-raising them before the flop with anything but the best of hands. Even with hands like jacks, queens, or ace-king, it's often better to see a flop first rather than re-raising before the flop against such players. You are a good player and you don't want to raise. They do. By re-raising with marginal hands before the flop, you'll be playing into their hands by neutralizing your post-flop skills.